you so much for opening the center just for me.
Yes.
So I just enjoy coming out here, and the last time I was out here, we shared some snacks and food after the service, which was really nice. And so I started talking to people, and they told me about, well, there's a shortcut. There's a shortcut for you to get home. You don't have to go through San Diego. There's a shortcut. And I'm all for shortcuts. So it's like, okay, what's that shortcut? So they told me, and I was like, okay, I get it. So tell me again. Okay, I get it. So I left here, determined to go on the shortcut. I had my GPS, which was of no use, because they wanted me to go through San Diego. And so I started on the shortcut because I knew I had to ignore the GPS. Well, I should have ignored my directions because they were wrong. And I ended up, I think, like Riverside or something, and ended up adding, an hour and 45 minutes to my drive. So it wasn't a shortcut for me. And so coming over last night, I was like, well, do I want to venture on the shortcut, look on the map, do a new route? And the answer was no. You just go with going through San Diego and get over here. So I'm very glad and happy to be here with you today. Ernest Holmes tells us that there's three worlds that we live in simultaneously. There's the mechanical world, there's the mental world, and there's the spiritual world. And initially I think of that and I go, that's a lot of worlds to keep track of. And so then I just start, looking at it and contemplating it. And then whenever I look at it, I go, okay, I have the mechanical world, and that's the world that we live in with our bodies. And there's a whole set of rules and laws that affect us as we are in this mechanical world. And then we have this spiritual world that is out there that we can't see. We can feel it, we can go through inner experiences with it, but we can't touch it physically. The emotions aren't there for it. We have to have it internally. And then as I further look at this, I go, well, there's a reason that mental is in the middle. Because mental is the gateway to understand the mechanical and understand the spiritual. And then what I've found is if I can find something that I can relate to or associate with that's similar, then I can use that same logic on something that I can't see. So I could look at something mechanical and feel that and go through that experience, and then I can translate the possibilities into something spiritual. And that's what I'm going to talk with you today about. So always in the mental world, there's a factor of imagination that's involved. In other words, you have to have a thought of something happening. So we have these laws in the mechanical world. There's the ones you're familiar with, are gravity and electricity and force, propulsion. There's all these laws. Well, those laws have always been there. They weren't introduced. They weren't, magically flown in from the aliens. They've been here the whole time. But what had to happen was somebody had to have the imagination to visualize that end state of electricity. I'll just pick on electricity because I know you only want me to talk for 2 hours and I can't get all the things in. But with electricity, there had to be a vision of the end game. And then once there was a vision of the end game, the imagination went forth, and then things started happening to test the end game, or test how to get there. And there were a gazillion failed attempts, but eventually we had electricity, and it was rudimentary forms of electricity, but it was electricity. And then over the years, we have the electricity that we have today. And that all became a reality for us because somebody had the thought that electricity was possible. And so as you go through things, you look at each one of those mechanical laws, you see that somebody had imagination, somebody envisioned an end game, and then somebody pursued it with such relentless passion that their end goal was received. So I'm like, oh, okay, I can relate to that. So I think some of you know from past talks with you guys that I love movies. Right? I always love to talk about movies. And so I'm not going to disappoint you, or I may disappoint you by talking about movies today. But the movie that I'm going to reference is called Phenomenon. Has anybody heard of that movie? John Travolta? Yeah. And so that you're not in the dark if you haven't watched it, I'll do, spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you what happens. But anyway, so John Travolta is just this normal guy, and then something happens, which in the movie they don't tell you initially what had happened, but then all of a sudden he can speak Spanish fluently. There's a kid that's in trouble, and he grabs a book and learns Portuguese in 30 minutes. He's learning about solar power. He's learning about all kinds of things that he, number one, had no interest in, and the other was he just didn't know how to put things together with it. But all of a sudden, he's doing all of this stuff, and it's getting pretty exciting. And so then he ends up breaking a code, Morse code, for a military installation. And boy, do people get upset about that in the government. And so they come and they grab him and grab his friends, and basically, how did you know that code? And he goes, just listen to it, just figured it out. And they wouldn't believe that. And so anyway, it went through a whole process for him, and he was reading 6 to 8 books a day. Can you imagine reading 6 to 8 books a day? I know it's the movies, but can you imagine reading 6 to 8 books a day? And so he had all this knowledge, and he had all of this things that were happening to him. And then he had a girl. There's always a girl in the movie, right? So had the girl, and he shares with her about energy, and that she's always with him, and he's always been with her. And the swaying tree, the energy of the swaying tree correlates to her holding her kids. And so she's, she's starting to get it. And so then toward the end of the movie, he has an episode where he blacks out and falls down, passes out, and then goes in the hospital. Well, it wasn't an alien that hit him with a burst of light. It was a tumor. So he had a tumor in his brain that activated all parts of his brain, unlike it's never been activated before. And so there was the answer. So all of us that were like, where's the aliens and all, we just had the concrete answer. It was a tumor. And so then the science world gets all excited. The doctors get all excited. We could study your brain. We could learn so much about us. And so they actually set up to ask him while he's living for them to kill him to operate on his brain. And I thought it was pretty profound what happened afterwards, because he said, I'm not my brain. I am not my brain. I might have something good to say in the last few hours of my life. And so the doctors are like real insistent, we want to, cut your brain. And it's like, no. See, what's happening is you've got such a grasp on technology, and you have such a grasp on, what was the other one? Technology, science. You have such a grasp, you have nothing left to grasp what's important. And what's important is human spirit. So I thought, whoa, I like this movie. I'm going to grab a hold of this. And so when you talk about the spiritual world, there's the correlation for me. There's the kickoff of my imagination. There's where I start looking and going, wait a minute. I can't see it or see the end result, but I can feel if I'm getting closer. I can feel how I feel. I can feel if I have the Spirit with me. And so that's all good. That's all good for me. And so one of the things I also realized is in the mechanical world, if you do something wrong with electricity, what happens? Anybody? You get shocked, or if it's a big nub bolt, you get killed. So it doesn't matter whether I do it, or you do it, or you do it, or you do it. If you break the laws of electricity, it's a given. It's not picking on you. It's like if you break the laws, you're going to get shocked, and that's just the way that it is. Well, when you go into the spiritual world, it's a little bit different. And then I had a curiosity on why. Why is it different? And so then I was like, okay, we spend in our time, you can watch TV, you can watch the movies, you can watch all of these things, and there is all of this time spent on the mechanical world. All of this time. And many people think that's the only world that there is. And then the mental state, the mental world, is what we do to work with that, the mechanical world. And what can happen in that mental state? Anybody have some challenges mentally in their mental world that they've gone through? Anybody had something you didn't have the answers and you couldn't tie it to the mechanical world? You couldn't tie it to electricity? You couldn't tie it to gravity? Have you ever had that?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what are your options? So your options are just stay in the mechanical world. You know, it's easy. Put my blinders on and I don't have to know any more than what I know. And there's a lot of people that that's their choice, and that's fine. And that's a key point there. That's their choice. So let me take you back a little bit to when I first started talking and say, what was the catalyst to start the journey for discovering electricity? What was it? Believe. I didn't get to lightning yet.
Oh, sorry.
Imagination. Imagination gets things started. And so just like in the mechanical world, the imagination gets you started in the spiritual world too. But whenever you had electricity, that person had imagination, but what did they have an imagination about? Did they have an imagination of this is what a light bulb will look like? This is what a circuit breaker will look like? This is what, you know, the wire is going to look like? Is that what their imagination was?
No.
No, right. Their imagination was that they could make light using electricity. So that's the end game. The end game with electricity is generating light. And so what's the end game with gravity? That what goes up must come down. Don't eat apples. The thing with gravity is once you learn the law, you can use the law. So once we knew about gravity, we knew why things happened in construction and just why things happened that way, but we took it another direction. We understood gravity, and then we could fly. Because we knew what the rules were for gravity, and if we used the rules the way that we're told to use them, or the laws the way that we're told to use them, we could fly. So what limits do we have in this world? What limits? What?
Death.
Not necessarily.
The ones we put on ourselves.
One you put on yourselves? Yeah. But in actuality, there's none. There is no limitations. So, I mean, you can put limitations on yourself and you can put whatever you want, but in actuality, you have no limitations. So with that, what's the end game? When you talk about spirituality and why are we here, for me, this was a big deal because it's like, how can I work toward the end game if I don't know what the end game is, right? So in spirituality, and when we talk about why we're here, what's the end game? What is the end game? Because how can you figure out how to get to the end game if you don't know what the end game is? Well, Holmes calls it the great discovery. And believe me, when I look through a reference, every time, great discovery, great discovery, great discovery. I'm like, hey, what's the great discovery? You're doing this reference through all the writings. What is it? And so I found it. You want me to share it with you?
Yes.
The journey, this is from Ernest Holmes, the journey of the soul refers to the theory that man's soul emanates from perfection and travels on the road of experience in order that it may return to perfection individualized. And so then that word individualized, wait a minute. Because you know that God is all there is, so you can't leave from God and come back to God with more than what you left with, right? It just doesn't work that way because God is all there is. So that individualized means that through your experience, you have created a container of your personality that's represented in the container of your soul. And in that container is everything about you and what you've experienced and how you've interpreted God's love here on the earth. So that's what the individualized is. There's more. We must bring our mechanical use of the law under the control of spiritual wisdom, for knowledge without wisdom might be dangerous. Only when wisdom speaks through knowledge can knowledge produce permanent freedom. Okay, so what do you think the end game is?
Freedom.
It's a trick question. Permanent freedom. Permanent freedom. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to have this permanent freedom. What is that? What is permanent freedom? So I'm one that questions. Give me a word, give me a phrase that is used in our teaching, and I really don't accept it at face value. I want to understand, because if I understand, then I can use it. Otherwise, I'm just shaking my head. Like one I've always used in description is, I forget what it is. Anyway. Truth, yeah, but anyway, the mind's short-circuiting. That's not a good sign. But anyway, so what happens is that freedom is something, but I'm looking at that freedom and like, I wanted a scripture. So if we say freedom today, what are you thinking of? I don't know what you may be thinking of, but I think of America. I'm free. I can do what I want. Freedom of speech, and you have freedom to say stuff that I don't like what you're saying, but I'm going to let you say it because it's freedom. And so that's the freedom that we have. And so then I searched a little bit more through Holmes' writings. Tell me what this endpoint is. Give me a description. And he does. We will do well to listen to this inner voice, for it tells us of a life wonderful in its scope, of a love beyond our fondest dreams, of a freedom which the soul craves. How many of you would like that? How many of you would like to experience what I just read? One person. Oh, no, two. Oh, okay. I was just seeing if, I lost you or saying, all right. But anyway, so I read that and I went, okay, I understand the end game now. And so just as the laws of the world, the mechanical law started with imagination, how does my exploration of my spiritual world start? Also with imagination. But can I use your imagination to start my end game? No. Why? Because my experience is individualized. And so if my experience is individualized, I can't look at your paper and see if I got it right. So whenever it gets graded, I can't go, oh, let me look at your paper, because it's different. We have to do this on our own. But then there's the challenge. We can't check our work. The only way we can check our work is living our life and having that fulfillment. And then what happens is we have a knowing. We have a knowing that God is all there is. We have a knowing that love is all there is. And that becomes our obsession. And as it makes that our obsession in this mechanical world, and that's the way that we think, that's the way that we act, that's the way people see us, then that becomes who we are. And as we are that person, we will be pleased with ourselves, and God will be pleased with us, and we will be excited at the end game. And so